So, whether you believe it or not, it is the end of June, and so I'm here today to do my June reading wrap up. I have felt like I kind of fell off of my reading mojo a bit for June, and part of that was due to just a lot of stress around my kids finishing school and working from home and all the fun things that have been going on for the past few months. And then the other part of it has really been just feeling a little bit uninspired by one or two of the books I've been reading, and just kind of struggling a little bit with my concentration in that area. But I think it's picked up now. I feel like the momentum has increased, so that's really great. I have finished 2 books thus far for the Book 2 prize that I cannot mention, but I read Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow on audio, and I read The Yellow House by Sarah M. Broom. And so those 2 books I'm not able to talk about my impressions of, but I did read them during the month of June. The next book I finished in June was Kingston by Starlight by Christoper Farley, and I read this for the CaribAthon readathon that happened mid-month, and this was delightful. I vlogged reading this book, and if in case you haven't seen that, I will put it in the description box down below. This book follows Anne Bonny. She's born in Ireland, and through different circumstances has to go it alone on her own at a very young age, and she becomes a pirate. And it is her story of sailing the seas on a pirate ship with a male crew, and she dresses as a boy to accomplish this without being discovered, obviously, as a woman in the 18th century. This book is excellent. It's a wonderful adventure story. It is also a great historical fiction with a lot of good references to interesting things happening and impressions of gender in here that I thought were really great. It's mostly on the open sea, so if you're looking for something that's more about Jamaica, that's only the last third of the book that's set in Jamaica. But I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I think if you're looking for a great beach read, you should consider this one. The next book I finished was Good Bones by Margaret Atwood. This is a short story collection, and it was published in the 1990s. I was not really a huge fan of this book. It actually helped me understand what type of short stories I like, though. These short stories were more anecdotal. They were clever, so it's all about kind of clever wordplay, referencing fairy tales and folklore in a clever, witty way, and a lot of social commentary as well. So I found that a lot of the social commentary was still very valid, even though this was written in the 1990s. It's still very valid today. It was mostly social commentary around the relationships between men and women. But I just didn't feel very inspired by this book. There were certainly a few of the stories that were, amusing to read and had some poetic qualities to them. A lot of them are fairly short, but I just don't enjoy this style of short stories. I'm there for the characters. I want to read about some interesting people in little snippets of their lives, and this book just didn't really cover that at all. There were no characters to be spoken of in this book. It was almost all first person, and it was more cerebral than based in any kind of character development or anything like that. So yeah, overall, I just didn't find this one was very successful for me. But, it's my Margaret Atwood for the year, so I've accomplished that box at least and ticked that off. I finished Girl Reading by Katie Ward. yesterday, and this is the fifth and final book on my 5-star predictions list. So I will probably talk about it a bit more in my 5-star predictions list video, but very briefly, because I know I had a couple people who added this to their TBR and were excited by my description of it. I'll just give you a kind of overview of my thoughts. I liked this. I thought that there were some parts of this, some sections that were so great that I wished they would have been a novel in and of themselves. So I think this is a debut novel, and for me it was really successful. There's a few things, words of warning I would give you. One is that there is no quotations in this story to indicate when there's dialogue. So I know I saw on Goodreads that was an issue for one reader, and it is kind of confusing the way she does the dialogue. There are other writers that don't use quotation marks for dialogue, so I know that it's kind of a frequently done thing, and it's totally possible to understand who's speaking. But there were moments where I wasn't sure if I was reading dialogue or not, so I kind of had to start reading and then be like, oh, okay, this is an internal thought, it's not dialogue. So that was a bit I think that could be confusing for people. My other problem with this, and it's kind of something that I find happens with a lot of books about art, unfortunately. I don't know if it's because I'm an artist, but I don't find that many books that are talking about art talk about the art enough. So, there's a description that talks about how wonderfully this book brings these art pieces to life, and I don't agree with that. I think that there were 1 or 2 examples that were successful, but overall, I didn't think she talked enough about the art, and she didn't really have enough literary references for me either, because when it's called girl reading, you want to hear about some literary references, I think. And there were a few, but not that many. It was more about the characters themselves and their situations. They feel very much like interconnected short stories, and that was another thing I wanted more of. I wanted more of a solid connection between each section. There's 7 sections in this book, 7 different time periods. You get small, little, very subtle connections in some of them, but not in all of them, which I felt was kind of weird. I don't know if I just missed them because they were too subtle in the ones where they weren't connected to the other storylines. So yeah, I enjoyed it. In case you're like, Jenny, you've talked about this, you're not telling us what it's about. It's kind of hard to tell you this because there isn't really a plot, like one plot to this story. It is 7 different character studies of women reading, and that being depicted in some way in each section. They are wonderful historical studies of time periods and place. There were some sections that I absolutely loved and I wanted more of, and there was another section where she flipped the perspective between 2 characters throughout the story, and I really wanted her to stick with one character. So she is great at creating interesting and compelling characters that you want to read about. So if you're a character reader, I would say read it just for that, because there are some great depictions of characters in here. But as a complete package, it didn't fit the bill for me. And unfortunately, that's often the case with novels written about artists or about art, where they just don't fit the bill. And I think in future, I might make a video where I talk about the novels I've read that are based around artists and art and give you some recommendations, because I'm always looking for those because I love reading about that, and I don't find that that's a very common topic in books. And then when I find one, I get very excited, and then I'm often disappointed because my expectations are very, very high. So it's a cool book. It has some great stuff in it, but yeah, didn't quite meet my expectations. So I did not get to finish all of the books that were on my June TBR. I'm currently finishing the last one right now. And so I will probably wrap that up at the end of July with my July reading. And so that is my reading for June. I hope you had a great reading month in June, and I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you for watching.